exploits distributed over web content, like exploited web content. So with that.
So just WMF is old news, right? Does everyone agree with that? It was back in January. No one really cares about it anymore. Everyone who's really worth their salt's already patched. Auto update in Windows XP. Who cares, right? The problem is you still get a 1 in 10 ratio right now if you actually try to hit random users with it. If you set up a website and all you do is serve WMF to them, 1 out of 10 of those users will actually accept it and it'll actually execute code on their system. And that number doesn't come from any kind of sanctioned white hat test. That comes from some folks in kind of the European drive-by malware install underground that actually gave me some numbers when I asked for them. The Browser Fund project kind of shook out a lot of things with regards to the economy of the malware installation industry and kind of how that whole process works, how much money there is to be made, and how well these types of older attacks still work. So in the case of WMF, 1 out of 10 people that they hit out of sites that have 30,000 to 40,000 users a day are vulnerable to this, and that's what they use to install malware. So it doesn't really matter if it's patched, it still works well enough that they don't see a reason to change anything else. In this case, someone hijacked one of the Flash banner ads for, was it? Yeah, it was one of the Flash ads that was part of MySpace. And Flash has the ability to run arbitrary JavaScript via this getURL function. And getURL basically takes whatever URL you put into the parameters, hands it back off to the browser, and that URL could be a JavaScript tag to do something else. So in this case, they did a JavaScript getURL tag that redirected them to another Flash application, and that Flash application then redirects them to a WMF file. The WMF file then automatically installs a piece of malware, and the guy sitting in the back makes 40 cents per hit that actually installs. So someone made a ton of money off this, and they actually, the numbers the media reported based on a counter built into the application was 1 million people were hit with this in the period of a week using this banner ad on MySpace. Now, some of us can figure that if you're browsing MySpace, you kind of deserve to be hit by WMF, but that's just kind of,
I wasn't going to say it.
If you're not patched to WMF and you're using MySpace, you kind of had it coming. That's all I'm saying. But in this case, I mean, it really shows like how the economy of scale applies to older vulnerabilities and things like cross-site scripting vulnerabilities in Flash. In this case, it was like 16,000 page views per day, according to Alexa.
Yeah, so this number is a little, I mean, obviously this number is a little hard to interpret. This is, he had the metric of 1 million within a week. There's a couple of numbers here at work. I'll break them down in a little bit. So MySpace, if we assume MySpace roughly, and people who work at MySpace can feel free to correct me on this, but roughly 70 million users around nowish, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, right? MySpace itself, according to Alexa, right, which is a quasi-reliable source of trend data for very popular sites. It doesn't apply to every single site on the web. If there's any marketing people in the room who maybe are attending with other people, if your Alexa rank is really, really high number and you jump 400 points, that doesn't mean anything, because statistically it only really counts for a certain number of sites. I can't tell you how many. So the metric that Alexa has for how many people see MySpace is around 16,000 page views, so 16,000 MySpace page views per day per million users of the web. All right, so I mean, if MySpace has 70 million registered users already, right? So I mean, it's 16,000 page views per 70 million users, so 16,000 times 70 essentially per million, and then every other number of the web. We tried to find reasonably good statistics about numbers of users on the web who either have, in the way of counting is weird, because it's either who has web access, who actually visits the web, who has a browser, what browsers do they use, blah, blah, blah. But basically, if you assume there's something like, I'll throw out 500 million users of the web, which is, I think, roughly accurate, I mean, to a degree of magnitude, right? 16,000 page views times 500, right? That's basically the number we're looking at in terms of how many people saw MySpace. How many people may have seen the actual ad is a little bit different, but he mentioned 1 in 10, right? If we just take MySpace users, 1 in 10 is 7 million, right? And then if we
40 cents, so I made a lot of money.
Right, and so basically this is the economies of scale, right? Of course, there's an economic advantage here, so it's all about economies of scale. You want to mention Flash 9?
Right. So the solution to all this was to add a new parameter tag to every Flash tag that's embedded in a web application, saying whether or not this allow networking tag can be used. And if you have allow networking equal no as the parameter for your Flash object on the web page, it basically says you can't do getURL, you can't do this JavaScript redirection, things like that. What they didn't really take into account is it only applies to Flash 9. If you haven't upgraded Flash, if you're using Linux and you're still waiting on Macrometer to get off and release, Flash for everybody else, then you have the same issue. Like, cross-site scripting is a fun issue because people use Mac OS X or Linux or, God forbid, OpenBSD and get on their high horse about how wonderful their operating system is. It doesn't freaking matter. If you have Flash and you have Mozilla, you're just as screwed as everybody else. And in this case, it was WMF, so it's not directly applicable, but in terms of web application hacks stealing data, there is no difference. I mean, I could browse Yahoo Mail with my Firefox on Linux, a hardened kernel, and like, you know, an OpenBSD sticker on the back to make it go faster or something, and it still wouldn't help. I mean, but yeah. So the point is, if you're not using Flash 9, none of these solutions for Flash-based cross-site scripting injection actually apply to you. In the case of, there's actually another case that's related to Google where it wasn't Google themselves with AdSense, but it's somebody who resells AdSense basically and allows people to do Flash banner ads that eventually do an AdSense click. They had the same issue, and they have a huge install base. They did the same solution to it, which is the allow networking tag. But anyways, that's kind of where things are that's kind of where things stand right now. The allow networking tag really kind of annoyed us because when we're putting this talk together, that was kind of our silver bullet. That's like, okay, well, it doesn't matter how great you strip out anything. If you allow Flash, you're screwed because of this get URL function. But because of the MySpace hit with the WMF stuff, they added this tag, and now all of a sudden, that part of our talk had to go out the window. So
yeah. Oh well. I mean, you know, in terms of talking about the realm of bad things, you know, the ability to, you know, a part of our talk getting trashed in exchange for less vulnerabilities in Flash, so much the better. Notably, again, this was a WMF vuln, this particular case, so it doesn't necessarily apply to Mac OS. But so people may ask, well, how many, you know, where's Flash 9 available, as an example, right? And it's not available on Linux yet, as far as I know. I mean, they could be making liars out of me right now. But notably, I'm running this on a PPC PowerBook. I'm old school right now. I don't have a MacBook. Notably, Macromedia has not released, they have not updated past Flash 8 for Intel MacBooks. So, I mean, I don't want to like harp on MacBooks either because I hope to get one soon. But if you've seen Johnny Cash's talk with David Maynard about, you know, they kind of pinged the Intel MacBooks as their particular example in their wireless fingerprinting, driver fingerprinting. They are also vulnerable to this same attack. There is no version of Flash 9 which you could get the benefit of the allow networking flag. So it gave some very brief overviews of some large cross-site scripting kinds of, you know, vulnerabilities that we've seen in the wild. These are all things that have been seen in the wild, right? The WMF one being the most recent. From our perspective, how do we want to make, in the context of this thought experiment turned into a talk and turned into a concept, like an attacking concept, how do we want to make cross-site scripting useful, right? What do you have to do? Well, we want to combine cross-site scripting injection with native code exploit payloads. That's really the idea. That was the genesis of the idea. And all it was me trying to figure out what cross-site scripting and viral propagation of JavaScript meant if we could combine things like HD's Hamachi and bugs that you find through things like Hamachi, et cetera, in browsers. Now, luckily, again, I didn't have to do much work because HD put together a thing called Browser Fun. Who's seen Browser Fun? Who hasn't seen Browser Fun? All right, all of you, write this down, browserfun.blogspot.com. If you can go there now, but please look at it. It's very, I mean, we're going to show you a screenshot in a second. But so once you combine cross-site scripting injection, all well and good, right? You have something, which in this case we hope is some kind of native code exploit. We wanted to use the Flash and WMF, and then actually, instead of using WMF, we were going to use a browser vuln. But we wanted to have some kind of native code exploit payload in the site. And then we want to propagate that same payload across sites or across a very popular site, ideally, with cross-site scripting, right? Or cross-site request forgery, either or. And then we want to hook into the browser. So we have essentially, you know, instead of just running JavaScript code to repost the same code, which we would also have, we'd also have an actual native code exploit for the browser. And then you want to hook into the browser, and then you want to go to the next web application, and then you want to try to essentially inject yourself into that next web application. Right? So there's a little bit of heuristics here, right? We're trying to say, go to something like MySpace, get owned by our browser vulnerability, and then transparently your browser will, as you browse around, find other potentially vulnerable sites because the code is just running hooked into IE. And so as you're browsing around, it'll look at what essentially we look at as form variables. Right? HDR is some code that looks at form variables through IE hooks. And so if you're going to blogger.com and it sees a comment form, it will automatically inject to test and see if it can get cross-site scripting code to go in there, right? And then if that works, we can also essentially just propagate the same thing. And the whole idea, the whole kernel of this is now you have essentially a unpatched, direct, unguarded route to massive native code owning, basically, right? I mean, that's really what it is, right? It's like all we're using cross-site scripting and the web for is the viral propagation mechanism. People like their interweb, right? It's a series of tubes, so I mean, who can't like tubes?
This is kind of the A-bomb for the blogosphere, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, exactly.
So far, web application vulnerabilities have always been like little islands, where each application, you can't really escape. Well, if you can infect everybody in MySpace, well, there's a whole lot of users, a really big island, you get them all, but you're still stuck in MySpace. Now, what if you look at smaller web applications, the ones that don't have, quite as much effort going into stripping out JavaScript, or those little standalone blogs, or all those, horrible little blogging engines that people use on like, $10 a month hosting sites. None of those things strip out JavaScript worth a damn. They just expect the person posting it to control what they post and basically strip out JavaScript from comments, but not from actual posts. So this allows you to basically, anybody who browses your island gets infected, has their browser infected, and then from that point, anywhere they go and post comments, post blog stuff, post their own blogs, send out email, anything they use with their browser, in the case of email being webmail, would then propagate the same code to those other islands. So you go from being able to take over just one little node to being able to take over just about everything they touch, everybody else they interact with. So you find a very prominent blogger, hit them first, and if they're doing 15 comment posts a day, you have this nice viral spread all the way across the blogosphere, whole thing melts down, and the rest of us who hate blogs can go, yay! Sorry, I don't really hate blogs that much, but...
No, clearly.
Yeah. So this is a screenshot of the Browser Fund website. The goal behind this is basically to describe what types of bugs affect modern browsers, how they work, and how you can demonstrate them. And what it ended up becoming was 31 days of 0 day. So we started off every day, and for the first 2 weeks, I basically had a big list of bugs I had already reported to Microsoft or to other vendors, and I was just going down the list, basically dumping them out. A lot of cases, the vendor was already working on a patch, or the patch was already done, but going through QA, or in the case of Firefox, they had already released a patch for it. So it wasn't really a big deal. But around the 12th or 13th, I kind of got sick of doing the same old bugs. So you know what, let me just find a new bug every day. So starting around 10:30 p.m., I started just digging for bugs, and then around 1 or 2 a.m., I posted a new one. And that happened from probably mob number 12 to mob number 31. So most of those bugs are still pretty fresh, if you want to call it that. Congrats to the Firefox and Mozilla development team for getting a remote code execution bug fixed within about 30 minutes after figuring out exactly what caused it. It just took 8 people and 4 days to figure out what caused it. But anyways, I got a t-shirt, I'm happy. So yeah, Browser Fund was fun. So Browser Fund was kind of like the recent project that I worked on. But a lot of people doing drive-by malware installs are already using other known vulnerabilities. For example, the MS06-014 bug uses an ActiveX control to basically create any other object. The way ActiveX security works, especially with regard to the object model and what you're allowed to create and do from an ActiveX, is there's only one layer of filtering. If you can load an ActiveX control, and that ActiveX control allows you to do something, that's it. That's the only security check. So this particular control had the ability to create any other object on the system with whatever privileges that the user had. So it didn't really matter what other security measures you had. If you could load this known good MDAC control and use RDS.data control to create any other object, you can use this to basically create the wscript.shell object, and from there install and download malware and all that. One of the, I think it's like either the second or maybe the 8th bug I posted, this HH control one, is an ActiveX control that had a heap overflow, where you keep setting the same property of an ActiveX object over and over and over again, it eventually corrupts the heap and leads to code execution. And at the time, I was like, oh, look, another heap crash, whatever, dumped it out. And about 3 or 4 days later, a managed security service provider contacted me saying, hey, we're actually seeing this already in the wild. I'm like, wow, that was quick. It took 3 days for someone to go from, a post on this stupid blog to a working code execution that uses a heap overflow. And they're like, no, it actually started back in January. I'm like, huh. Well, I'm glad I reported it. Hopefully it'll get fixed soon. So it's actually being used in the wild to do drive-by malware installs already, even when I went around to posting on the Browser Fund site. So if you find a really good vulnerability in the browser, more than likely someone's already abusing it. So that's kind of the issue. Also, there's another issue with a really similar problem to MS0614. If anyone installed the WMI software development kit, it installs another object called